I should have listened. I should have paid attention when the locals warned me. But back then, their murmurs about this house being unsuccessful sounded like tired folklore. Superstition, the kind that festers in small towns with nothing better to do. I saw the house for what it was, a relic of forgotten craftsmanship, a puzzle begging to be solved. Its crooked windows and sagging roof didn't repel me. They fascinated me. The price was laughably low, and that should have been my first red flag. But all I saw was opportunity. I imagined the renovations, the workshop I'd build, the quiet that would let me think and create. Leaving the city behind felt like shedding dead weight. Out here, surrounded by fog-softened hills and the smell of damp earth, I thought I could finally breathe. But from the moment I stepped inside, something felt wrong. Not wrong in the way of faulty wiring or creaky floorboards. I expected those. This was different. The house was too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but suffocating. It was as if the air itself was holding its breath. Every creak of the floor, every soft groan of the wooden beams, felt deliberate, like the house was aware of me. Night, it was worse. I'd lie in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening. For what? I didn't know. The wind outside barely stirred, yet sometimes I'd hear faint sounds, the softest rustling, like fabric dragging against wood. I'd tell myself it was the house settling, that old buildings make noises, but no amount of reasoning could shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Still, I pressed on. During the day, I filled the rooms with the sound of hammering, sanding, measuring. I tore down rotting panels and stripped away layers of grime. The house began to change under my hands, but that feeling, that sense of being watched, never left. If anything, it grew stronger, more intrusive. I told myself it was the isolation, the stress of renovation, that I just needed time to adjust. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered that something was wrong. And in the heavy silence of that house, it was getting harder to ignore. The first time I heard it, I was in the workshop late at night, sanding down an old door I planned to refit. The sound was faint, like a sigh pressed against the walls. I froze, holding my breath, waiting for it to happen again. Nothing, just the dull hum of the sander still rattling in my hand. I laughed it off, chalking it up to fatigue. Long days and longer nights, that's all it was. But then it happened again. A whisper, soft and thin, like a voice bleeding through the walls. It wasn't words at first, just the sound of breath where there shouldn't have been any. I started sleeping with the lights on. Every shadow seemed to stretch too far, every corner of the house too dark. The sounds came more often now, rustling, sighing, sometimes a soft scrape like nails dragging across wood. I tried to drown it out with music, with the clatter of tools, but it seeped through everything. Days turned heavy, nights even heavier. My dreams twisted, filled with dark hallways and walls that seemed to breathe. I stopped answering calls, ignoring messages. I told myself I was focused on the renovation, but the truth was simpler. I was afraid to explain what was happening, afraid of sounding insane. Then, one night, the whispers turned into words. I couldn't make them out, not clearly, but they were there, soft, persistent. And they were coming from the wall behind my bed. I moved to the couch downstairs after that, but the whispers followed. I started noticing other things, the mirrors, reflections that didn't move when I did, shadows that didn't belong to me. The windows would fog from the inside, as if someone was breathing just beyond the glass. The lights would flicker when I passed by, and once, I swore I saw a figure standing at the end of the hall, gone when I turned back. I told myself I was unraveling, that I was tired, overworked, but no amount of rest quieted the voices or erased the dark smudges that lingered just out of sight. The basement drew me in like a black hole. I told myself it was just curiosity, but deep down, I knew the house was pulling me. I could hear the whispers humming through the walls, guiding me. The stairs groaned under my weight as I descended, flashlight beams slicing through the dense, stale air. The smell was stronger here, damp and old, tinged with something metallic. Rust, maybe, or something worse. Boxes lay rotting, their contents spilling out. children's toys with faded colors, brittle ropes coiled like snakes, and pieces of broken furniture stacked haphazardly. But it was the papers that caught my eye, burnt scraps scattered across the floor. I crouched to pick one up, the edges blackened and curling inward. The drawing was crude, scratched in charcoal. A figure, hollow-eyed, peering from behind what looked like a wall. More scraps. More of the same, figures watching, waiting. Their eyes empty, their bodies little more than dark smudges. Something shifted in the air, and I felt it, the house noticing me. The whispers grew louder, tighter around me. I should have run. I should have left right then. But I couldn't. Not anymore. A glint of metal caught my eye. A key, half buried under a pile of those drawings. Felt cold in my hand, heavier than it should have been. I turned slowly, and there it was. A small, narrow door, hidden behind a collapsed shelf. A door I hadn't seen before. My hand trembled as I fitted the key into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a room smaller than I expected. The walls were covered in the same crude drawings, dark figures with empty eyes. In the center sat an old wooden chair, its arms worn smooth, ropes frayed but still knotted tightly around it. And then the door slammed shut behind me. The whispers erupted into laughter, low, guttural, and everywhere. I wasn't alone anymore. A glint of metal caught my eye. A key, half buried under a pile of those drawings. Felt cold in my hand, heavier than it should have been. I turned slowly, and there it was. A small, narrow door, hidden behind a collapsed shelf. A door I hadn't seen before. My hand trembled as I fitted the key into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a room smaller than I expected. The walls were covered in the same crude drawings, dark figures with empty eyes. In the center sat an old wooden chair, its arms worn smooth, ropes frayed but still knotted tightly around it. And then the door slammed shut behind me. The whispers erupted into laughter, low, guttural, and everywhere. I wasn't alone anymore. The air thickened, pressing against my chest as the laughter dissolved into a suffocating silence. My eyes darted to the chair, to the ropes, to the shadows flickering on the walls. Something was waiting for me to act. I backed into the door, shoving with all my strength. It didn't move. The walls seemed closer now, the drawings warping and shifting, their hollow eyes following me. Then I saw it. A crude inscription carved into the wood of the chair. Sit, and it ends. But I understood the lie. Sitting would end nothing. It would only begin again, like all the others before me. The whispers returned, softer now, almost gentle. They beckoned me forward, promising relief, release. I had two choices, take the chair or fight the house. And I wasn't ready to give in. The walls seemed to pulse, as if the house itself were alive, drawing breath in slow, deliberate intervals. The shadows clung to the edges of the room, thick and unmoving. I pressed my back against the cold door, my eyes locked on the chair. I could still hear the laughter, faint now, trailing off into distant whispers. I scanned the walls for another exit, a loose panel, a hidden latch, anything. But there was nothing, only the drawings. Hundreds of them, layer upon layer, smeared in dark strokes that looked too much like dried blood. The hollow-eyed figures stared, their smudged faces turning in the corners of my vision. I refused to blink, certain they would move if I did. Time dissolved into the stillness. Minutes or hours, I couldn't tell. The whispers began to rise again, curling around me like smoke. They weren't words anymore, they were feelings. Loneliness, hunger, anger. They wanted me to understand. They wanted me to stay. My breath quickened as I noticed something new. The drawings closest to me weren't still. They pulsed faintly, their lines trembling. I leaned in closer and saw it. Beneath the smudges, scratched deeply into the walls, were more names. Not just mine, dozens of others. All crossed out. All but mine. My fingers traced over the letters, feeling the grooves cut deep into the plaster. Some of the names were old, faded into near nothingness. But others were fresh, as if carved only days ago. Andrei. My name was waiting, A sudden weight settled over me, pressing down on my shoulders. The air grew heavier, thicker. I turned slowly, the chair looming larger than before. The ropes seemed to move, coiling in anticipation. It wasn't just a chair, it was a promise. I couldn't stay here. I wouldn't. My eyes darted to the cracks between the floorboards. Beneath the dust and grime, something glimmered metal. I dropped to my knees and clawed at the floor, splinters biting into my skin. I pulled free a rusted hinge, then another. A hidden trapdoor creaked under my weight. Without thinking, I forced it open and slipped into the darkness below. The air was colder here, damp and suffocating. My flashlight barely pierced the black. The walls were narrower, closing in with every step. It felt less like a basement and more like a tunnel, carved with frantic, jagged strokes. The ground crunched underfoot. Broken glass, splintered wood, and something softer that I dared not identify. The whispers were different here, closer, no longer teasing from the walls, but breathing at the nape of my neck. I moved forward, deeper, my heartbeat loud in my ears. The corridor twisted and narrowed until I stumbled into a wider space. The beam of my flashlight skittered across the walls. More drawings, more names. But these were fresher, more desperate. Then I saw them. Objects scattered across the dirt floor. A cracked mirror, a child's shoe, torn pieces of clothing. All relics of those who had come before me, those who hadn't left. At the far end of the room, something gleamed. Another door, not wood this time, but metal rusted and scarred. The handle was cold, slick with moisture. I hesitated. Then slowly I turned it. The door groaned open, revealing a narrow passage lined with brick. It descended deeper into the earth. I hesitated, but the whispers behind me swelled, urging, demanding. So I went down, each step heavier than the last. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew thick with rot. But there was something else. A sound. Not a whisper this time, but a distant sob. Weak, broken. I wasn't alone down here either. And this time I wasn't sure if that was worse. The sobbing echoed faintly, seeping through the stone walls like a ghost of sound. I moved cautiously, each footstep crunching over unseen debris. The flashlight beam quivered in my grip, casting long, jerking shadows that clung to the walls. Every breath felt heavier, thicker, as if the very air was laced with something ancient and foul. I followed the sound, drawn deeper into the labyrinth beneath the house. The corridor narrowed until I had to turn sideways to squeeze through. My shoulder brushed against the damp stone, and I flinched at the clammy touch. Then the sobbing stopped, replaced by silence. But not emptiness, the kind of silence that feels occupied, watched. A faint glow flickered ahead. I approached slowly, peering into a room lit by the pale shimmer of candlelight. Dozens of melted candles sat on every surface, their wax pooled and hardened in strange patterns. In the center of the room, a figure huddled on the floor. A woman, draped in tattered cloth, rocking slowly. Her hair was matted, and her thin frame barely moved. I hesitated, then spoke. My voice raw, foreign in the suffocating dark. She didn't react. Not to me, not to my voice. I circled cautiously, keeping my distance. Then I saw it. The ropes, frayed and loose, trailing from her wrists and ankles, connecting to the floor as if part of the very house. She rocked slowly, whispering to herself words I couldn't hear. I stepped closer and she stilled. Slowly, her head lifted, hollow eyes locked onto mine. Not eyes of flesh, but dark pits, like the figures in the drawings. And then she smiled, not kindly, not with relief, but as if she had been waiting. The candles guttered, shadows surging like a living thing. And in that moment, I realized the truth. She wasn't alone. They were everywhere, pressed into the walls, their hollow eyes staring. Dozens, maybe hundreds, the forgotten ones. The whispers returned in full force, overlapping voices tangled together. They surged forward, not words but desperate cries. I stumbled back, heart hammering. I had to move. I bolted from the room, the narrow hall swallowing me whole. The walls seemed closer, the air heavier, as if the house was shifting around me. But the whispers followed. I don't know how long I ran. Time bent in that place, twisting around me. The halls seemed endless, looping back on themselves. Doors led to brick walls. Staircases spiraled downward only to end where they began. The house was no longer just wood and stone. It was alive, shifting to keep me trapped. Then suddenly I was back. The hidden room, the chair, the drawings. Except now the chair was occupied. It was me, bound by the same frayed ropes, head slumped forward, chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. I stood frozen, staring at myself. Then slowly the head lifted. The figure stared at me, not with fear, but recognition. And it smiled. I staggered back, my mind fracturing at the edges. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, drowning everything. My flashlight flickered and died. In the suffocating dark, the house spoke without words. I was already part of it, and there was no way out. I turned to flee, but the walls shifted, closing in around me. The drawings seemed to peel from the plaster, their hollow eyes following me. The whispers became voices, clearer now. They called to me by name, beckoning, promising relief if I simply accepted. If I sat, sit, sit, sit. The echoes became unbearable, vibrating in my bones. I stumbled into a corridor I hadn't seen before, lined with doors that opened and closed on their own, revealing glimpses of horrors I refused to understand. Faces in the dark, limbs bound in rope, rooms that bled shadows. And still the house urged me back to the chair. The dark swallowed me whole. My breathing was ragged, echoing off the walls like shallow gasps in a crypt. I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed. The blackness was absolute. The air grew colder, damp with the weight of years. The house wasn't just shifting. It was sinking its roots deeper, coiling around me like a serpent. The whispers fractured, breaking apart into hissing voices that slithered into my ears. They repeated one thing over and over. Sit. I staggered forward, hands scraping against the rough stone. My mind screamed to resist, but the pull was stronger now. A magnetic force, dragging me back toward that cursed chair. Every step felt heavier than the last. Then a flicker of light, faint, distant. I lunged toward it, desperate for something, anything, other than the suffocating dark. The passage opened into a wide space. This room was different. Its walls were covered in mirrors, fractured and smeared with handprints. Each reflection twisted, distorted, showing images that couldn't be real. Myself but wrong, older, broken, bound. In one mirror, I saw the woman from before, standing behind me, her mouth moving in silent words. In another, the chair sat empty, ropes coiled like waiting snakes. I tore my gaze away, pressing forward. My reflection followed, its eyes dark and empty. Then I saw it. A door, barely visible behind the fractured glass. I ran for it, shards crunching underfoot. My hand met the cold brass handle, and I yanked it open. The door didn't open into another hallway. It opened into darkness, a void that felt thicker than the dark I'd already passed through. I hesitated, but the whispers pushed me forward. The door led to a staircase spiraling down, each step groaning underfoot. The walls here were smoother, almost polished, but the air was heavier, thicker. The whispers dulled, replaced by something worse. Breathing, slow, steady, like something vast and slumbering. I descended, each step pulling me further from the world I knew. At the bottom, I emerged into a cavernous space. The walls pulsed, alive with veins of dark roots. In the center stood a massive, gnarled tree, its bark split and weeping black sap. Faces twisted in its trunk, mouths open in silent screams. The chair was there too. But this time it wasn't empty. The figure in the chair was no longer me, not exactly. Its head turned slowly, and I saw my own face twisted into something ancient, something wrong. Its mouth moved, and I heard the words not with my ears, but inside my skull. You are home. The ground trembled, roots splitting the earth beneath me. I tried to run, but the floor split open, and I fell. And the house, or whatever it truly was, swallowed me whole. But it wasn't the end. I awoke in darkness, lying on cold stone. Around me, the whispers quieted, replaced by the slow, deliberate sound of breathing. Not mine. I was deeper now, somewhere far below the house, where no light reached. And in that suffocating dark, I realized I was not the first, and I would not be the last. The fall felt endless. I tumbled through suffocating blackness, the air growing colder and heavier with each passing moment. Then impact. My body struck something solid. The breath knocked from my lungs. I lay still, disoriented, as the darkness settled around me. When I managed to rise, I realized the ground beneath me wasn't stone. It was soft, almost spongy. My flashlight flickered weakly back to life, casting a thin beam over the ground, and my stomach turned. I was standing on a carpet of clothes, shoes, and broken objects. Personal belongings. A child's cracked doll stared up at me with hollow eyes, its face smeared with dirt. The air here felt wrong, thick with rot and something older, something primal. The walls of this cavern seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a slow, rhythmic pulse. I wasn't in a basement or tunnel anymore. I was inside something alive. The whispers here were different, softer, sadder. Not words, but feelings, fear, pain, endless despair. They seeped into me, cold and heavy. I moved forward, unable to stop, as if the ground itself urged me on. Ahead, I saw shapes rising from the cluttered ground. Figures, half-formed and bound by tangled roots. Their faces blurred and mouths agape in silent screams. They reached out but did not move, trapped, forgotten. I couldn't tell if they were alive or just echoes of what once was. And then, among them, I saw the woman again. No longer weeping, no longer broken. She stood tall, eyes locked onto mine. She raised a hand, pointing deeper into the dark. I followed. The path narrowed, walls closing in, pulsing with that steady, monstrous breath. The air grew warmer, thicker, tinged with the scent of damp earth and decay. The whispers became clearer now, voices layered atop each other, repeating one thing. Join us! The corridor opened into a massive chamber. The walls glistened, slick and veined, converging at the far end where something pulsed. A vast, beating mass. It was the heart of the house. I could feel it, every beat shaking the ground beneath me. Ropes and roots coiled around it, tightening, loosening like muscles flexing in slow motion. Beneath it, the chair waited. But it was no longer empty. The figure bound to it was barely human. Limbs twisted, face distorted. Yet I recognized it. It was me, or something that had been me. Its head lifted, lips curling into a grotesque grin. Welcome back. The heart pulsed, louder, heavier. The whispers became screams, not of fear, but of hunger. The ground split open, revealing more chairs, more figures, all bound, all silent. Each one turned slowly to face me, and I understood. They weren't keeping me here. They were waiting for me to stay willingly. The air around me tightened, thick and suffocating, wrapping around my chest like invisible hands. The pulsing of the heart above me reverberated through the walls and into my bones. This rhythm was slow, deliberate, waiting, watching. The figures in the chairs remained still, their heads turning in unison to face me. Their eyes, if they had eyes, were nothing but dark pits, bottomless and endless. I could feel it now. The house wasn't just a structure. It was something ancient, something patient. It had been here long before me and would remain long after. And I had to choose. The chair stood at the center of it all, bathed in the dim glow of the pulsating heart above. Ropes dangled from its arms like the grasping tendrils of some ancient predator, waiting to pull me in. If I sat, I knew I would become part of the house. Another voice in the endless chorus of whispers, another shadow in the walls. But if I ran, where would I go? The house shifted, bent, and folded around me. Doors led to nowhere, stairs to oblivion. Could I even find a way out, or would I lose myself in the endless dark? wandering until the house decided to take me anyway. The ground trembled beneath me, and I stumbled back. A fissure split the floor, revealing a black void beneath, churning like a living thing. The walls seemed to lean closer, suffocating. The figures in the chairs didn't move, but I could feel their anticipation. A collective breath being held, waiting for my choice. I backed away from the chair, my steps slow and deliberate. The whispers rose in a frantic crescendo, clawing at my mind. They pleaded, begged, screamed. Words twisted together in a storm of noise. Stay. Join us. End it. But beneath it all, there was something else. A faint voice, distant yet familiar. My own voice, calling from far away, beyond the walls. Run. I turned and ran. The ground cracked and heaved as I moved. The walls convulsed, closing in. The hallways bent and stretched unnaturally, leading me back toward the heart, toward the chair. No matter which way I turned, the house fought me, guiding me in circles. The dark laughed around me, shadows splitting from the walls, reaching. Then a glimmer, a thin line of light in the distance. A door. I lunged for it, pushing harder than I ever had. The walls screamed. The heart pounded in fury. The ground split beneath my feet, but I leapt, crashing through the door. The door didn't lead outside. It led to a corridor. Long, narrow, endless. The walls here were smooth, impossibly smooth, and they pulsed faintly under my touch. It was like walking through the veins of something impossibly large. The air shimmered with heat, and ahead, I could see flickering lights. Torches? No, eyes. Countless, glimmering in the dark. The whispers had stopped. Only the sound of my footsteps remained, echoing unnaturally long. Then the corridor changed. Doors appeared on either side, stretching far into the distance. Each one slightly ajar, each one whispering promises and threats. As I passed, some swung open, revealing rooms that twisted my mind. An endless staircase spiraling into a sky of teeth. A mirror reflecting nothing but darkness. A room where the walls bled. And voices, familiar voices. My mother's laughter, distorted. My father's voice calling my name, but wrong, too deep, too cold. Friends, lovers, every voice from my past. They called me, begged me to enter. I ran, but the corridor stretched on. The doors became mouths, gaping wider. Some spat out shadows that crawled along the walls, mimicking my movements. Others showed glimpses of the chair, always the chair, waiting in every reflection, every corner. I was being hunted. Something moved ahead. A figure, human maybe, stood still, blocking the corridor. As I approached, I recognized it. Me. But it wasn't me. It was what I could become. Bound in ropes, hollow-eyed, smiling. It's easier if you stop, it whispered, tilting its head. Couldn't fight it. I charged forward, pushing past, but its hand shot out, gripping my arm. Cold, strong, pulled me close, mouth near my ear. You belong here. I tore away, sprinting forward. The corridor shifted, narrowing, walls pressing in. I clawed at them, desperate. Then light. Real light. Faint, distant, but real. I ran harder, faster, ignoring the hands reaching from the doors, the shadows clawing at my back. I broke through, and I fell. The fall didn't last. I hit the ground hard, but it was solid earth, not the shifting flesh of the house. I gasped, the air cold and biting. Above me, the house loomed, distant and silent. I was outside. Or was I? The world felt too still. The wind didn't move. The trees stood frozen. I turned slowly, and in every shadow, I saw them, hollow eyes watching. The whispers were gone, but the silence spoke volumes. I had escaped the house, but it had followed me. The fall didn't last. I hit the ground hard, but it was solid earth, not the shifting flesh of the house. I gasped, the air cold and biting. Above me, the house loomed, distant and silent. I was outside. Or was I? The world felt too still. The wind didn't move. The trees stood frozen, branches hanging motionless in the air. The sky above was an endless stretch of gray, like a ceiling painted with ash. I turned slowly, and in every shadow, I saw them, hollow eyes watching. Not moving, just watching. I forced myself to move one step, then another. My legs ached, my chest burned. But I was free, wasn't I? The ground beneath my feet felt real, solid. Yet every sound, the crunch of leaves, the snap of twigs, echoed too long, too loud, as if the world itself was empty. The road back to town should have been close, but every path seemed unfamiliar. Trees twisted in unnatural shapes, bending toward me like silent witnesses. The house was gone when I looked back. No structure, no looming silhouette, only woods, but the presence remained. The whispers were silent, yet I could still feel them, coiled in the air, slithering beneath my skin. A pressure behind my eyes, a chill on the back of my neck. I wasn't alone. A distant sound broke the silence, a faint rustling. I turned sharply. A figure stood far off between the trees, motionless, watching. The shape was wrong, stretched, the head tilted too far to one side. I blinked, and it was gone. No, not gone. Closer. More figures appeared, barely visible between the trees. Dozens, then hundreds. They filled the woods in all directions, just standing, waiting. Every shadow held eyes. I ran. Branches clawed at me. Roots grasped at my ankles. The world blurred, trees bending impossibly as I moved. No matter how far I ran, the figures remained, always in the corner of my eye. Then a clearing, open and wide, impossibly vast. And in the center, a single chair. Old, wooden, the same chair, waiting. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, breath ragged, heart pounding against my ribs. The chair stood in the center like a beacon, untouched by time or weather. Its ropes swayed in a breeze I couldn't feel. Behind me, the forest was silent. The figures no longer followed, but I knew they watched. They didn't need to move. The house was no longer a place, it was everywhere. It had spread, its roots twisting into the soil beneath me, coiling through the air I breathed. I was never meant to escape. The house had never wanted me to stay trapped inside. It wanted me to bring it here. My legs moved on their own, slow and deliberate. Step by step, I crossed the clearing, unable to stop. The closer I got, the clearer the whispers became. Not in my ears, but in my bones. They vibrated through me, calling softly, "Sit." I stood before the chair, trembling. My reflection stared back at me in the polished wood. But it wasn't me. It was something older, something worn thin and hollow. It smiled. I could sit, let it end. The pain, the fear, the running. It would all stop. I'd join them, become part of the walls, the whispers, the dark. A single step forward and it would be over. But I didn't move. Not forward, not back. I looked at the ground, at the roots curling beneath the dirt. I thought of the chair, the house, the endless corridors. The people who had come before me, and the ones who would come after. No, I reached down, grabbed a heavy stone from the ground, and with all the strength I had left, I smashed it into the chair. The wood cracked, splintered, the ropes unraveling. The whispers screamed, a sound of fury and pain, shaking the air around me. The ground split, the trees groaned and bent backward. Shadows poured from the cracks, writhing and twisting, clawing at the sky. The figures screamed in silence, their forms breaking apart, dissolving into dust. The chair shattered beneath my hands. And then silence. Real silence. The air was still. The ground solid. The forest normal. The house was gone. I fell to my knees, gasping, shaking. The sky above was blue. The wind stirred the leaves. Birds called in the distance. I was free. But the silence lingered in my mind, deep and waiting. And I wondered if the house was truly gone, or if it was simply waiting for another door to open.